So I want to introduce a new concept that we've not seen yet in Vue, and that is lifecycle hooks. So every Vue component that you create goes through a specific lifecycle in your application. It's created, it's mounted to the DOM, it's updated, maybe with different data at some point, and eventually when we don't need it anymore on the screen, it's destroyed. Now we can tap into these different parts of the lifecycle of Vue components, and we can run code at different points using what is known as lifecycle hooks. So I'm just on the Vue documentation right here, where it's got a really nice diagram of a Vue component lifecycle, and it shows all the different hooks that we can use. So to begin with, we can see we use the create app method to create our application, which is eventually mounted to the DOM. Now, these different red things right here, these are all the different lifecycle hooks, the different functions that we can use to fire code at different points during the component's lifecycle. So the first one that we have access to is the before create hook. And this fires before the component is even fully created, and it's at the very start of its initialization. Now, inside this hook, we can't access any data from the data object or any template elements yet. Then it moves on, and when it's created the components, we fire this created hook. And this is when the component has been created but not yet mounted to the DOM. Now, we can't access the data now, but we still can't access the template. And after this, it starts to compile our template right here. And then when it does that, it fires the before mount hook. Now, this is the point just before our component is mounted to the DOM. And in here, we can now access all of our data, events, and templates. Now, right after this hook, Vue mounts our component to the DOM, and then it fires this hook right here, the mounted function. Now, this is a popular place to make fetch requests if you need data for your component, but you can also make them in different hooks like the created and before mount hook too. Now, once the component is mounted, we know that data can change either over time or in reaction to user events like clicking buttons. Now, when that happens, when that data updates and changes, it's then that we fire the before update hook. Now, this happens after the data change, but before the updates are re-rendered to the DOM. Now, once they are rendered to the DOM, we fire the updated hook, and that's after all of the updates have been reflected in the browser. Now, finally, when the component is no longer needed on the screen in the browser, it's removed. It's at this point that we fire two final hooks, before unmount and unmounted, which we could use for any component cleanup. So that's the whole lifecycle right here. It's a very good diagram, which I would suggest looking at yourselves. So I'll leave the link to this page attached to this lecture. And now what we're going to do is have a little go of some of these different hooks inside our project. So what I'd like to do now is show you how to use these different lifecycle hooks in our components, and we'll just go through a few of them. So let me first of all go to the block component, and remember, that's the green block that appears on the screen only after we click the play button. Now, if we want to use a lifecycle hook inside this component, we place it directly inside the component object. So after the props, I'll come down here and just say mounted, for example. Now, if I wanted to run some code when the component has mounted the DOM, I'd place it inside this mounted hook right here. And this will fire only when this is mounted to the DOM, the component. So for example, I could say console.log, and I'll just say components mounted inside there. I'm going to save this and refresh the page and just clear the console. Now when I press play, this component will mount the DOM, and we should see this logged to the console, which we do. Cool. So let's try another one. I'm going to now use the updated hook. And remember, this fires when any data inside our component is updated. Now, we don't have any data that is going to update over time inside this component. We only have the delay that's passed into us, and it doesn't change after it's been passed in. So let's instead create some data for this component. And inside here, we need to return the object. And I'm going to create a property called show block, and I'm going to set that equal to false to begin with. Now, the reason I'm creating this is because I'm only going to show this if this is true. Because remember, when we click on this to start a new game, we don't want to show it right away. We want to wait for however long this delay is. and then we only want to change this to true to show the block after that delay is up. So that's why I'm doing this. So I'm only going to show this if we have a true value for show block. So by default, when you first load this page, it's going to be false, so it won't show. And then what we'll do is start a timer for this delay, and we'll change this to true. And we'll do two things in doing that. First of all, we're going to demonstrate this hook updated, because then that will fire when this changes. And secondly, when this is changed to true after the delay, this block will then show. And then in the future, the user can click on it after it shows. Does that make sense? So to begin with, if we check this out, if we refresh and click play, then we don't show it now by default because this is false right here. So now let's start a timer inside the mounted hook, because that's when we want to start the timer, right? We want to start the timer for this delay inside mounted when this goes to the screen, this component. And then after that amount of time, we want to show this div right here. So let's start the timer inside mounted. So I'll say set timeout to start the timer. And inside here, we fire a function after a certain amount of time. Now that certain amount of time is the second argument, and it's going to be this dot delay. So the amount of time in milliseconds that we pass in. Now that could be like 4,000 milliseconds, which is 4 seconds. So this would fire after 4 seconds, or whatever the delay is. Now inside this function, what do we want to do? Well, after that 4 second or delay, whatever it is, we want to change this to true. So I'm going to say this dot show block is then equal to true. And also we'll log out the delay, console.log this.delay, just so we can see how long, oops, let's do that on a new line, how long we were waiting. So remember, from the start, we pass in this delay that we make right here as a prop. We take that in right here. Then when this whole component mounts, we say, okay, we'll start a timeout and fire some code after that amount of time in milliseconds. So after that amount of time, we set show block to be true, and therefore, after that amount of time, this should show on the screen. So let me save it, and I'm going to get rid of that and refresh, press play, and then this still fires. After some time, we should get the other function, which then shows this and also the delay. Okay? Now at this point, when this shows, this has been changed to true. So the data has changed, it's been updated. And at that point, this will fire. So let's see that. So console.log, and we'll say component updated, like so. Save it and get rid of this, refresh, and let's play again. So when the green block shows, we should see component updated at the very same time. So let's try it out. We wait for a few seconds. Then it shows, and at that point we also see component updated. So if you want to perform any kind of code at that point to do something or other, you'd put it inside the updated hook. Cool. So now we've done a bit of this functionality and we've seen a couple of hooks. Let's also do one final hook, unmounted. And by the way, we will see other hooks in the future as well. I'm just showing you a handful now. And inside here we'll say console.log unmounted. So remember, this fires after this component has been unmounted from the DOM. So when we no longer see any of it anymore. Not when this doesn't show, but when this whole component doesn't show. So let's save it. And if we refresh, well, the component never actually unmounts at this point in time. Even when the block comes on, it never unmounts. But if I go to the code, and I'm just scooting this over here so we can see the console. If I go to app.view and comment this out and save, we're going to see it over here, because now this should be no longer in the DOM. It's taken out by view, and we should see component unmounted. Save it, and we can see unmounted right here. Awesome. So this function would also fire if we're using view routing in the future to go from page to page, and we're showing different components for each page. If we navigate away from a page, then the component from that page will unmount, and then this will fire there as well. So it's also good for when you're working with the view router. And we will work with the view router later on, so don't worry too much about that for now. but hopefully you've got at least a general idea of the life cycle of a Vue component now, and these different methods or different hooks that we can use to fire code at different stages during that component lifecycle. And they are really useful, as demonstrated right here, when we use a set timeout to wait a certain amount of time before we change a property to show the block on the screen. So this is a really useful hook for us at the minute. Okay, so what I'm going to do is get rid of some unnecessary stuff right here, which we don't need anymore. I'm going to get rid of that as well. We don't need that. And I'm going to get rid of these two hooks because we don't really need them. I'm going to save it as that, and we'll move on in the next video to actually reacting to this block appearing on the screen.